Hey everybody, how's it going? Can everybody hear me okay? Let's see. Hey. All right, thank you. Thank you for your patience, everybody. As I said in the message, I think I sent out a couple of days ago. Any meeting got a new look, and so we're just working out the technical difficulties as always, and trying to figure out that making sure our wonderful presenters that we have on deck for today can actually hear themselves, hear you, and see their slides. So I know we're starting a little bit late, so I apologize, but yeah, we're just trying to work out these new features here. So I think it looks kind of cool though. But thank you for joining. This is Rainesha, obviously, and we're kicking off our third web session on Policy and Government 102. We have some really dynamic presenters that are going to be facilitating today, and Cammie is actually going to be taking the lead on facilitating most of the session. I'll turn it over to her, and I just want to say hey, and I'll be popping back on periodically and provide you guys with some closing announcements before we head out. So thank you, everybody, and thank you for your patience, and I'll turn it over to Cammie.
Thanks, Rainesha. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Hope we got all these technical things worked out, and just keep us posted on the chat box. Oh, it sounds like there's some feedback. So anyone on the phone, just make sure that you're muted when you're not talking. And if you're using your phone, make sure that you have your computer muted so that they're not echoing off each other. So is that better, Shanika? Ariana doesn't hear anything. Okay. Well, let me just keep it posted in the chat box if you hear more feedback. Thank you. Okay, so the last session that you all had was about Policy and Government 101. And in that one, you talked about the different branches of government at the federal level and how laws are created. And so we wanted to talk more about the state landscape and what the process looks like at the state level. I know that a lot of you have already done state-level advocacy or maybe local level advocacy at the city or county. So we wanted to talk more about the state legislative advocacy process and then how it interacts with federal laws. Okay. All right. So these are the learning objectives for today. Learn how federal policy shapes state and local policy, and then learn about the state legislative advocacy process. So before we get in depth, I'll tell you a little bit more about our facilitators. We have Rainesha on the phone. We have me from PWN, and then we have Priya Walia and Christine Castro, who work at reproductive justice organizations in Washington State and Pennsylvania. And I think Chris might have gotten kicked off, so I'm just trying to check in with her.
I'm here. It's Priya that got kicked off.
Okay, great. Sorry. All right, cool. So let me tell you about a little bit about our presenters. So we have Priya Walia. I'm having so many technical difficulties now. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so Priya is going to be our first presenter. Priya is currently working at Legal Voice and also an organization called Surge Reproductive Justice in Seattle, Washington. Priya graduated from University of Cincinnati College of Law. During law school, she interned at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, where she worked on expungement and record sealing for people who were reentering the community from prison and jails. She also did a legal externship with the Cincinnati Interfaith Workers Center, and she also worked in Nashville, Tennessee on progressive family policy issues. She's worked at the Center for Race, Gender, and Social Justice, and she was also an associate member of the Freedom Center Journal. She served on the executive board of the Asian Pacific American Law Students Association and held leadership positions in Out and Allies as part of Law Students for Reproductive Justice. She also worked with a professor as a legal research assistant working on crimmigration issues, which is the intersection of the immigration and criminal law. So that's Priya. She's going to be our first speaker. The other speaker is Christine Castro. So she's working at New Voices in Reproductive Justice, as well as the Women's Law Project in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And Chris graduated from the Roger Williams University School of Law. She's going back to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where she's from, and working on an array of different issues related to women's rights and LGBT rights currently. During law school, she interned at the National Women's Law Center, where she worked on health and reproductive rights issues. She also interned at the Committee for Public Counsel Services, where she assisted with people who were accused of crimes. Throughout law school, she also participated in the Brooklyn Defender Services and Pro Bono Immigration Project, helping survivors of domestic violence. She was awarded the Leadership Scholarship and was a two-time recipient of her school's Public Interest Summer Scholarship. She also served as a judicial extern with the United States Court of Appeal. Like I said, she's originally from Philadelphia and has returned there to work at the organization she's at now. So these are really fantastic reproductive justice warriors here and also friends of mine. So I'm really happy to hear from them. And we'll come back and let them talk to you more about their experience doing state-level advocacy. But first, I just wanted to check in, and this would be a good opportunity actually for us to see if we're going to get over our technical difficulties or not. So why don't we try and go ahead and do a check-in question. I know that you all had to go and do assignments after the last session where you did some research about your elected representatives at the federal level. So if you want to go ahead and try to come off of mute, we're going to try to see if we can take everyone off of mute really quickly. Yeah, I see that we're having some issues. Okay, so we're going to try to take everyone off of mute. And the check-in question was, what is one thing you learned about your elected representatives at the federal level when you went out and did your research since last session? And if you also, we want to keep it short since we have a lot to get through, but if you also want to share any questions you have for the presenters about state-level advocacy or the state legislative process, feel free and share that too. Okay. Let's see. All right, what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and try to promote everyone to a presenter. So just make sure that you mute yourself when you're not talking and use *6 to come off. All right, I'm promoting folks to a presenter. So if does one of the fellows want to come off of mute and just try chiming in to see if this is going to work?
Yeah.
Can you guys
hear me?
I'm on my laptop.
Okay, I can hear I can hear someone.
So it's Christine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, and I heard
Arlena.
Like
Tiami.
I think.
Tiami might have chimed in too.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Do you want to be our first check-in person, Tiami?
Sure. As for my representative, he's actually a newly elected representative, and he has become he was the first African-American chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. Dwight Evans is the two committees that he sat on have been small business and agriculture. Being a Philly resident, he saw, how the elderly and the poor were having a hard time actually feeding themselves because grocery stores were not near in the neighborhoods or within walking distance, and sometimes not even on the public transit route. So he was very vocal and very adamant about having those resources coming into the neighborhoods, and essentially like brought in, a better revenue for the neighborhoods here in Philadelphia. So now we have not only fresh produce in the neighborhoods, but also several corner markets that have like the odds and ends that you need, like to prepare your meal. So yeah, like it really like took away the hunger that was filled in Philadelphia.
Great.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yep.
So this is Theresa. Hi everyone. So the question was, what did we find out new about our representative that we didn't know before? Is that correct?
Yeah, and if you have any questions before we get started for the presenters to keep in mind.
Okay. My representative is Robert Raley, District 1 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. One thing I found out, I didn't know he was on so many caucuses and committees. And he's been there for this is his 9th term. So he's been around for a while. But I also didn't realize that he is so dedicated to ensuring LGBT human rights, and he's committed to women-centered care, and that he also signed the bill to have Trump produce his taxes. And he also opposed a H.R. 3 bill named the No Tax Funding for Abortion Act, because it launches the unprecedented attack on women's health care, and he opposed the efforts to women's health care, especially when we're talking about Planned Parenthood for women and making sure that they have all the care that they need. So he's on women's side when we talk about reproductive justice and sexual health rights. So I'm glad to know that about my representative, and I happen to have the opportunity when we went to AIDS Watch to actually sit with some other of my delegates and educate him on transmission of HIV, as well as U equals U, which is undetectable, is untransmittable. And he was very interested in having that knowledge because he didn't have it.
Awesome.
Hello, this is Sharon. You can hear me?
Sharon.
Okay, thank you. My Democratic House representative is an international law attorney and a former Army military prosecutor. And I learned that he's passionate about pursuing justice for victims of rape and sexual assault. And he's very involved in economic development and jobs and supporting veterans. My Republican State House representative, he has served in the Georgia legislature since 1999, both in the House and the state. And he has openly discussed on a few interviews, news interviews, that the Republican Party has practiced gerrymandering, and he also stated in the interview that he believes Medicaid expansion in Georgia will happen.
That's great. Was anyone else able to come on?
Hi, this is Ebony. Can you guys hear me?
Hey, Ebony.
Okay. So my U.S. Congressman is Mark Vesey, and I learned that he's on the Armed Services Committee and the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. I mean, that was all interesting to me, but what was more interesting was with science, space, and technology, he's very interested in that aspect of educating students. So he's very interested in education. How I could use that to my advantage is and when I spoke to him at AIDS Watch, he kind of perked up when we mentioned comprehensive sex ed in schools, so getting rid of the abstinence-based education. He was interested in hearing about that, so I think that could be, he could be an ally, and that could be a great benefit for trying to get some comprehensive sex ed in Texas, as well as, stopping the abstinence-based education funding that the federal government gives out. I think he'll be a great ally with that. So that's what I learned.
That's awesome. That's great. And I see some folks chatting in the chat box. Maybe they can't come off mute. Andrea says, I learned that Lamar Smith is no for women's reproductive rights. He is for securing the benefits for veterans, and he's for the wall. So that's good to know that person might not be the biggest ally, but maybe there are things that he can be brought over on.
Shanika also added that her representatives, Debbie Stabenow and John Conyers, were part of the HIV/AIDS caucus.
Wow, I just realized I was just talking on mute for a bunch. That's great. And I think Kamaria said that her rep, Darren Soto, is opening an office in the city where she lives, which is exciting because it'll help people be more engaged. She doesn't think any other state official has an office in this city or even know where the offices are located. So that's awesome. Tiami says Dwight Evans was definitely not for the AHCA. That's good news. Is anyone else able to come off of mute? Okay, well, if anyone else wants to, if you can't come off of mute, go ahead and share anything else that you want to add to this question of what you learned about your representative, as well as any questions you have for the presenters. Okay. Yeah, okay, great. A lot of people, sounds like people are keeping track of how their representatives voted for the AHCA, since there was the House vote yesterday and it did pass narrowly. So we definitely need to make sure that those representatives know that that was not okay if they voted for it. And, there's still a lot of work to do now that, it sounds like everyone knows who their senator is. And so there's a lot of work to do in advocating for those folks to vote against this in the Senate. So that's a conversation for another day. Thanks for checking in, those of you who could. Go ahead and move along in our presentation. So like I said today, the main idea is thinking about the difference and the connections between state and federal policy advocacy. Can you guys see these slides? Okay, there we go. I can see them now. They took a really long time to load. Can folks see them now? Yes, okay, great. Brandy says yes. Okay, awesome. So, no. Okay, great. So, like you talked about last time, the federal government obviously has a lot of powers that are divided over the three branches. And so some of the things that are explicitly in the federal realm are maintaining the military, the ability to declare war on other countries, establishing the post office, making our money, setting copyrights and patents, and then a few other things that the federal government explicitly has power over, like setting like what our weights and measures are and things like that. And so some of the things, so the federal government has exclusive control over some things. The states have some control over some things, and then there's a lot of places where it overlaps. And so I think a lot of times these things are connected. There can be a federal component to it, but then the state's the one controlling it, or that sort of thing. So, or like with Medicaid, for example, that's one thing where the money and the guidelines come from the federal government, but then the states use their own money and administer the program within the guidelines in the ways that they want to at the state level. So some of the things that are kind of under the control of both the federal system and the states are collecting taxes. So if you've ever done a tax return, you might have had to do a state income tax return as well as a federal one. Both can establish courts. Both can regulate commerce within and between the states. The federal government and the states both set rules around banks and borrowing money and credit. Both the state and the federal government are supposed to provide for the quote-unquote general welfare. So, obviously in practice, that doesn't always mean providing what people need, but they both are able to provide things like health care and set regulations around those sort of things. And then both the federal government and the state government can make and enforce criminal laws. And that's one of those things where the state government is pretty powerful in that aspect. That's why each state has its own system of district attorneys, is to enforce those criminal laws. But then there is some federal influence there as well. And then at the more local level, there are things that the state has quite a bit more control over. Like there might be still some federal guidelines that they're following, maybe, for example, to be able to access money from the federal government, but ultimately the state has a lot of control. So states can set up and establish local governments, whether that's at the state level or the city level. States have a lot of control over schools. And states are able to regulate the commerce within the state. One thing that, has been in the news a lot the last few years is that the states are allowed to regulate marriage. And of course, there are some federal guidelines that have been put in place, or, the Supreme Court has said, for example, that marriage isn't regulated just to heterosexual man and woman couples. But so the states can regulate within those guidelines, and then regulating corporations. So those are just some of the differences, and of course there's some overlap here, but it's kind of a general idea of what some of the main areas of control are. Okay, I see people are working out the technical difficulties in the chat box. That's great. Thanks everyone for hanging with us. And so another example, just thinking about how the state and federal government and advocacy is different at different levels, but also very connected. I thought it was useful to talk more about HIV criminalization. So this is something that you all talked about last week. The Repeal Act was recently introduced by Congresswoman Barbara Lee. And HIV criminalization is something that's being advocated for change around all different levels. So you see we have Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who's advocating at the federal level for changing some laws. And then we have some of our PWN members, Tammy and Kamaria, who are currently doing stuff both in Florida and across the country to change the laws. And there they are in front of the Florida Supreme Court building. So thinking about HIV criminalization, there's action happening at the federal level. Like the last session, as you talked about, this Repeal Act was recently introduced by Barbara Lee, who is a representative from California, along with other legislators at the federal level. And the Repeal Act, what it does, if it were to pass, is that it directs these federal officials, so the Attorney General, the Health and Human Services Director, and then the Department of Defense, they are supposed to basically review different federal and criminal laws and then provide guidance to the states about what they should be doing with their criminal laws around HIV. So this is an interesting one where there's a bill that's trying to change the federal laws, but what the federal laws will ultimately be about is guidance for the state. So even though this is a federal law or a federal bill that's being advocated for, the ultimate goal is that this bill will provide guidance for the states to then change their laws at the state level. So this federal piece of legislation is very much connected with what's happening at the state level. So meanwhile, while we have these federal efforts happening to provide guidance and more information for states to change their laws, there is state-based advocacy happening. So on the left on this slide, we have a picture of PWN Colorado and other folks that they worked with in a coalition. In Colorado, in 2016, they were able to pass a bill that changed the HIV criminal laws to either get rid of them or change them in a way that they weren't singling out HIV for criminal prosecution. So that's an example of a group in the state, led by women living with HIV who are badasses. A group in the state was actually able to pass a law changing the state criminal laws. And then on the right over here, we have some other PWN members and PWN fellow, Stacy, in the back there. So in South Carolina, what they've been doing is they started more like a public education campaign. So they did a training of the trainers where folks learned about HIV criminalization and the issues with it and what it looks like in South Carolina. And then you can see in this bottom picture, they're out there training members of the community and doing broad public education to lay the groundwork for, doing advocacy to change these laws. So these are different examples of advocacy. There's writing and passing a law, and then there's, other types of advocacy, such as public education, and doing that more cultural change component. So I just wanted to bring up this example as things happening at the federal level and at the state level. Even if the repeal bill passes, it doesn't necessarily mean the state laws are going to change. So both of those things need to change to really make the biggest impact on people's lives. And I think with that, if there are no questions, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Priya. Priya, are you on the line?
I am, thanks.
Okay, awesome. So I'll turn it over to Priya. Thank you again for joining us, who's going to go talk a little bit more about the actual nuts and bolts of state advocacy and some things to keep in mind for you when you're thinking about this. So go ahead, Priya.
Thanks so much. I missed a lot of the first stuff with technical issues, so I'm just going to assume that Cammie said very nice things about me, or at least hope. So this is my state capital in West Virginia. I just think it is one of the most beautiful state capitals. I'm not biased at all. And I actually am doing work here in Seattle. So Washington is the state I'm doing most of my advocacy for, but we also work in the 5 Pacific Northwest states. Our capital is in Olympia, not in Seattle, so a lot of my policy advocacy work is done from remote. Personally, I love state advocacy. It's my favorite. I know that y'all are trying to get more into federal, so not to take away from that, because you really do need a background in federal advocacy before you work on state advocacy. The reason I like it better is because it is in your own community and with people that may pray like you, look like you, need the same health care as you. There's lots of different ways you can find to help the communities that you're already in. So for me personally, I try only to do policy work for communities that I'm a part of. I don't think that necessarily the people that are in positions of more privilege should be dictating to people who are struggling what they need. It should be an ask, a give and take. So typically I work on issues that affect the South Asian community, the Asian community at large, women as well as queer people, and people with disabilities, and with a focus on health policy. So with that, I'll give you this very boring slide with lots of text. I apologize for that. But I think these are all really important points. So I heard a lot of great things when y'all met your representatives from the federal level. The nice thing about state level advocacy is that your representatives are even more easily accessible. Typically, they will have offices in their district. Many of them continue to work, most of them at law firms. Some of them are on boards of energy companies doing sneaky things. Some of them work at nonprofits, but either way, they are in your district and you can find them and you can talk to them. Most state legislatures also mirror the U.S. Congress, with the exception of, I believe, North Dakota, maybe Vermont. That's something that I don't think any of you are from those areas. So it's a good idea to learn what your legislature looks like. Usually there will be the two houses. You have the House and the Senate. And I also think it's really useful to know your neighbor's politics. So for me in Washington State, I want to know what's going on in Oregon. I want to know what's happening in California and Idaho and Montana and Utah, Alaska as well, because oftentimes our cultures are dependent on our geography. So when I was living in Tennessee and doing policy work there, it was very different than doing it here in Washington. It's a very blue state here. It was a very red state there, but I could still do progressive work in Tennessee. Just I had to be strategic about it. So all these questions are questions to think about. I'm not going to go through each one, but these are all very, very important when looking at bringing new bills or supporting a bill or opposing a bill. I'll just pick a couple of them that I listed and talk about them. So the deadline for when a bill must pass to the opposite house, that's a really key thing to know. So I brought a bill to the House. It was a bill that would require doulas to be allowed into prisons and jails for pregnant people who were incarcerated if they requested a doula or a midwife. And it was presented in the House, and then there was a date where it had to switch to the Senate. It had to be voted up or down, and if there was no vote, then it was kicked out. Then at the Senate, when it's in the opposite house, there's a deadline for when it needs to switch, when it needs to be voted on, and if it's not, then it's kicked out. So all of these little tiny things are really hard to get your mind around, but I personally just take a lot of notes, and I talk to a lot of people and ask these kind of questions, and I pay attention. And when I say know your neighbor's politics, I don't mean get to know the nitty-gritty, the deadlines and all that for your neighbors. Just know what they're thinking about, like what is their general idea about the issues that you're advocating around. So your basics are what you need to know if you're going to do your state-level advocacy in your own state. Then on to the next slide. So I find it really important to make friends. This is a picture I took 2 weeks ago at a Black Lives Matter march. This group, I thought they were really sweet and cute. Grandmothers for Race and Class Equality. These grandmothers are extremely active. They fundraise for Black Lives Matter, and they have quite a few wealthy friends that they don't mind asking money from. So I thought that was a really good way of using their privilege and their ideas to raise money. So making friends is a strategic way to do advocacy. Volunteering, joining coalitions, creating a coalition, and I'm not sure, many of you might know what that means, some of you might not. For example, we have a coalition here that I joined. It's a reproductive health coalition, and there's a lot of members from organizations such as Planned Parenthood and local clinics that provide abortion, because that's mainly what we talk about. But then there's also members of the public that are just nurses who care about making abortion accessible. And in that coalition, we can spend the time, our time talking about how the group of us can use our power more strongly to go and advocate for different bills, for or against. We help each other track legislation. And then also going to city council meetings is a good way to see what's going on at the state, even though that sounds counterproductive. For our city council here in Seattle, they have 5 subgroups. They have immigrant subgroup, they have a group for women, they have a group for housing. I regularly attend at least one of those. So every month I try to sit in on one of those meetings, and I brought ideas, I brought resolutions and other different things. I've gotten to know them, and in that way you can influence state law. So for example, I brought a resolution that says immigrants are entitled to health care, all the health care that they need, which obviously, that is very pricey. And I also said undocumented, documented, doesn't matter. They should get trans-related health care. They should get culturally competent, respectful health care, HIV health care. They need all of their health care provided. And so what this is saying is that it's a statement of a value that the city of Seattle holds. And eventually it could become an ordinance, which would only affect Seattle. And then if they see that it's doing a good job as an ordinance, we could bring it as a state law. So even though right now some might say, okay, Priya, you wasted 2 months like going to these meetings and writing this bill that's just a resolution, that's just, in words only, totally political theater. Yeah, that's what I think the council members who passed it would think, is that this is for political theater so they can get their pictures in the newspaper. But for me, I have my strategy of how I'm going to take that and turn it into actual health care for people that deserve it, which is everyone. The other thing, meeting the policy wonks, I find this really important. I have this thing you can see at the bottom. Maybe this wasn't the most tasteful picture, but it's a question gun. It's like what my friends in high school and college would always say about me, is that I help people with my question gun, and I just start asking questions and I can't stop until they're like, all right, I gotta go. And I do that to people who know a lot more than me. So the policy wonks, the people who understand what's going on, who have kept track of things for years. Sometimes they're lobbyists, sometimes they are executive directors at different organizations that run organizations that advocate for things that I'm interested in. And just saying, hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee, or can I buy you lunch, or can we meet in your office, or something like that, and just say, I don't want to join your group, I'm not asking for a job, I just want to pick your brain. And people love talking about themselves. And so they will talk about the long history of this one bill back 30 plus years, and you can get all the information you need and hear all the different players, and I think it's really, really valuable. And the local radio station usually keeps a lot of track of what's going on at the policy level, so I like to listen to the radio on my commute. And tracking legislation is another great thing to do, so you know what's going on. Let's see. Okay, so this is another high-level, a lot of text, not a lot of pictures. Working the maze from the end, I don't know if any of you heard this, but this is what my mom used to say, is work that maze from the end and get your end result and then go backwards and figure it out. And somehow that's easier. I think it's the same thing. But anyway, it works with policy. You look at what you want and what the end result is, and you work backwards. So if you want, let's say, healthcare for all, I would start from there and then look at who doesn't have healthcare. Okay, undocumented people, people who are in between houses, some people in the lower middle class. Where are the holes? Where are the things that need to be filled? And then work from there. Finding groups with resources is another good way to work the maze. If they have a lobbyist, such as Legal Voice, the organization I work for now, we have a lobbyist, and sometimes we have volunteers that come with great ideas, and then they'll tell someone like me, a staff attorney here, their great idea, and then I'll take it to our lobbyist. And then, lo and behold, we have 2 full-time paid lobbyists at the Capitol talking about this idea that a volunteer just walked in and gave us. And that happens all the time. So please don't feel like you can't just walk into an organization and tell them what to do. Do it. Who cares? Why not? Also be detail-oriented. I think that, for example, we get these bill templates from national organizations. I'm just going to pick on Planned Parenthood since I already said their name again. They will often send out this is a model bill for something that that we want every state to have this kind of bill because it's too hard to pass at the federal level. Well, I think that those come with they're like templates. They need altered. They need to make sense locally. They need to make sense in your state, and they need to make sense for your legislator. And also you have to look at their values. So when I was working in Tennessee doing this sort of work, we had this one Republican senator who did not believe in accommodation for anyone, for anything, for any reason. He didn't even believe in ramps for wheelchairs, no accommodations at all sanctioned by the state. So when we were talking about breastfeeding accommodations at work, we had to use a different word. And we had to, change the national template so it made sense to him, because he was the chair of a committee that dealt with labor and employment issues. And that's how we wanted to frame it, because in Tennessee, you want to talk about the money. You don't want to talk about a woman having the right to go to work, which, goodness, why can't you handle that? I don't know. But I also think it's really important to study to make sure that you know what's going on. Back to the first slide, knowing the nuts and bolts and all the dates and all that. The reason I say that and I emphasize it, I looked through everybody's pictures and bios, and this is the most impressive group of people I've ever seen, and I'm super happy that I get to talk to you. I'm not sure how much information I'll be able to provide, but I also noticed that this is a group that is all women, I think, and a lot of people of color, and I'm a woman and I'm a person of color, and when I walk into a room of lobbyists or people in a coalition meeting or senators and legislators and all that, it's largely white men, and they're a lot older than me, and I'm often quite intimidated. So for me, what has helped me is studying my behind off so that I don't feel like these are a bunch of people that know way, way more than me about this topic, and that I'm going to somehow get caught. I always feel like I'm in places that I shouldn't be. So here is the last slide I have, because I know we are running out of time, and I wish I could talk to you for a lot longer, but Chris has some amazing things to share. This was me testifying against a bill that would have required minors to notify their parents if they were seeking an abortion. So the bill was brought in this House, and so I went and talked to Planned Parenthood's lobbyist. She was just in the hall, and I was like, "Hi, I'm Priya, and I don't know you, you don't know me, but tell me the history of this entire bill." And she did, because people love talking about themselves and their work. And she told me that this one guy, this senator that brings it, he brings it every year. This is his favorite bill. It's his baby. So we know that he's going to bring it every year, and we have to keep fighting it so that he looks stupid and he looks like he's wasting money. So I gathered some people from his district. I filled a room with a bunch of people. I got some law professors. I testified. I told him that, very respectfully, that he was being dumb. And so that's, that's just, you just have to talk to people. Regardless of fighting, supporting a bill or whatever, you are going to fail at some point. And resilience is absolutely key, especially in policy advocacy. Things are very slow. I brought a bill that I loved. I think we talked about in the beginning, the doula bill. I felt really passionately about it. I got a group of 50 doulas in the state of Washington to meet on a Saturday and write letters and do all these things, and the bill still failed. And I was really upset, to the point where I had to call my mom. And then I talked to the lobbyists, and they said, bills don't usually pass on the first year, and you just have to keep trying, and you just have to keep building. And once there's all this interest in it, then we can get some real results. So building up community, it does multiple things. It makes your voice stronger, and it also gives you a group of people behind you backing what you're thinking. Timing is really important, because sometimes the House doesn't want to pass something just because the Senate only passed 10 of their bills for no other reason than that. And sometimes there are just other reasons. So pick people's brains and don't ever feel intimidated. You are already ready. You have every tool you've ever needed to jump in and be an advocate, and you have the personality type for it. You have the ability, the intelligence, all of that. Just be introspective, learn about yourself and your strengths, and you got this. And that's my contact information. If you have any further questions for me, feel free to call me. That's my direct line at work and my email, and any questions, I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you, Priya. It's so cool to hear what's happening across the country. And Priya's going to stay on the line with us, I think, so that if there's more questions that come up throughout the session, she'll still be here. I did want to pause because I know that was like a lot of good information. Do folks have questions for Priya about what she was just talking about before we move forward? If so, you can just unmute yourself, and we'll have a few minutes.
Hi, this is Theresa. Thanks, Priya. That was a lot of information and very valuable to hear. So my first question, it's at the end you were saying that most bills don't pass the first time, especially they're new bills, but don't get discouraged. Continue to do the work and send the bill again. But on the second time, as you move the bill through, grow your collective power and build allyship with those who are like-minded like you, especially on the federal and state level, who are in positions where they can make a difference, and also your stakeholders. Am I correct?
Yeah.
I know that was a lot.
If I understand, if I understand your question correctly, you're saying gathering stakeholders for the second time to bring a bill is what's important? Yeah, absolutely. I think gathering stakeholders and also finding out a lot about your representatives. So we got a Republican representative to bring the doula bill, and the way we did that was we found somebody who he's like a sweet old man. He's obviously like, old, white, straight, cishet, like just doesn't get it. Doesn't really have a lot of compassion for women and people of color who are in jail and prison. So that wasn't the way we were going to get him, not through compassion. We were going to get him through loyalty. And he has this one secretary he's had forever, and she's also a doula. And so we had her bring a movie to him about women in jails who got doula services versus didn't and had different birth outcomes. And so we had her bring it just as her own idea, showed it to him, and then we could have a conversation. So it just depends on who you're targeting. And we targeted him because he was the chair of the correct committee to bring that bill through.
Yeah. The second question is also to make sure that you do your research and find out where they stand on a bill too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
And I see that Kamaria posted a question. She said, because she's not on the phone, she said the question for the nuts and bolts slide, which is this one, she said these things vary from, go back. She said these things vary from state to state and from federal. Like they vary from state to state and from the federal level, correct?
Yeah. So there's the federal system, and I would learn that first and foremost because then every state is similar to the federal, but a little bit different. But they all mirror off the federal system. So most of them have the two houses. Then they have all different deadline days, and some of them have like a short session one year, then another year they have a long session. So every other year they have a short and long. I think in one state they only there's 1 year where they have to vote on every single bill that's brought. It's really weird. So I definitely would learn the federal first just in case you move or you want to do advocacy in another state, and then you can work off of that information.
Does anyone else have a question?
Hello, this is Sharon.
So we do have a bit of an echo, so if everyone can just make sure to turn off if you're not talking, to mute yourself. And if you have like two things open, such as your phone and your computer, make sure that you don't have them both on. Sorry. Go ahead, Sharon.
Yes, sorry. I hope it's not my computer making the echo. I don't know. But my question was, I just learned not too long ago about the American Legislative Exchange Council, also known as ALEC. And
yes.
I learned
They're
that
evil.
they have a, yeah, that's what I was wondering, like, is there another group who is like totally opposite of them who write bills that can be submitted?
So ALEC is a really good group to study. Just as an aside, there are groups that monitor ALEC that are progressive, and they figure out like when they're going to bring the bills and in what state and to which representative. It's also really good to, if you're looking at an ALEC bill that was presented in, I know I'm going off of your question, but if someone is bringing an ALEC bill in your state, it is really important to go out and educate the public and let them know that any bill that was created by ALEC was voted on first by corporations, secondly by the group in there, which is not just lawmakers, and third, then by the people. So it goes through a corporate filter first, and it has to be business friendly, which means that there can't be anything that only benefits the human beings. Secondly, to answer your question, is there an equal and opposite, like a good guy ALEC out there? Not that I know of that is as comprehensive, because they talk about the environment, immigration, criminal justice, everything. But I found many different organizations fill in those gaps, and they do it better than ALEC does because they go in and talk about very specific issues. So, like, there is a reproductive justice, health, there's all these bills that different groups like Planned Parenthood, NARAL, for the Pacific Northwest, us at Legal Voice, and other groups that bring bills as samples. When I was working in Tennessee, A Better Balance, we created a breastfeeding at work draft bill that was circulated all around the country, and everybody could use that. So it's a little harder on our side because it's not centralized, but that's because we don't have like the corporate overlords that we answer to. So yeah, I would just find a smaller organization that specializes in doing the policy work that you want to concentrate on. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I was asking because I was hoping that a bill can be drafted for Georgia on the topic of decriminalization of HIV criminalization laws.
Oh, let's talk offline about that, you and I. Send me an email, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. That was really helpful, actually. I didn't know all of the process that ALEC has. Well, if there are any other, we are going to have more questions at the end. I think for the sake of time, why don't we go ahead and move on to Chris's part of the presentation. And of course, you can always put questions in the chat box, and we'll keep monitoring that and try to address them all later. I think we're going to skip our polling question just so that we can get moving on with content. I see Sharon saying false. Yep. I'll quickly, I was going to do this true or false. And I think most of you probably know the right answer, that actually you don't have to be a lobbyist. You don't have to be paid to advocate for a specific bill or help draft a bill. Hence, you know, why we're doing this whole fellowship program, that you all feel empowered and have the tools to be advocating for the things that you care about on both the federal and the state level. So I see everyone chiming in on the chat box, but it's false. So I'll go ahead and turn over to Chris now, or Christine, who's doing work at multiple places in Philadelphia. So if you want to go ahead and get us started, Chris, and then we'll have more time for questions at the end. So.
Okay, perfect. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, perfect. So I gave a great overview and a lot of details and helpful tips. And so I just wanted to highlight some examples of advocacy that we do here in Pennsylvania, using examples from the amazing work that the two organizations I work for, New Voices for Reproductive Justice and the Women's Law Project. So, Cammie, I can't see the slide. So what slide are we on right now?
Your mission and vision.
Okay, great.
I think it's your mission and vision.
Okay, perfect. So just to give some context and information about like the work that we do, I think it's really important to just give you a brief introduction to New Voices for Reproductive Justice, in case some of you aren't aware of this organization. So we advocate for the complete health and well-being of Black women, girls, and femmes, and you can see our mission and vision statement. And we carry out both our mission and our vision through a reproductive justice framework, because we know that people don't live single-issue lives, right? And so for us, in order to do our work effectively, we address the oppression that, based on race, class, and gender, affecting women of color. And so all our work is centered around Black women and girls and femmes. And so we're really intentional about the projects that we sign on to and just like our programming. So next slide, please. And so what we're trying to do is, through this work, is really build a thriving movement for reproductive justice in Pennsylvania and Ohio. So we have an office in Cleveland and an office in Pittsburgh, which is where I'm based, and then also an office in Philly. So we're growing, which is fantastic. And we have an intergenerational leadership pipeline of Black women, femme, and girls. And so a lot of our programming is really intended to further this and to really build our leadership and development skills so that Black women and women of color are really leading the charge and talking about the issues that are most affecting their lives and their families and amplifying our voices. So one example of advocacy that New Voices does is through our Voice Your Vote project. And so that's our year-round integrated voter engagement program, because at New Voices we believe that social justice won't really be achieved until our policies and our laws are informed by the experiences of Black women and their families and the needs, their needs, and how we can support them. So we really want to get Black women at the table so that they have an active and meaningful role in shaping policy. And so we believe that our voting engagement program really does this because it really helps build on leadership development, civic engagement, organizing, public policy, and culture change. And it really is a way to step into political activism. So that's one of our big programs. And then the next slide. Let me move it on my own. So we also organize lobby days, both in Cleveland and here in Pennsylvania. And so we do this in partnership with some of our coalition members. And we do this because we know it's really important for our elected officials to hear from their constituents. And our mission when we hold these lobby days is to really have a big turnout of Black women and girls and to really elevate their stories and experiences, because traditionally these spaces are occupied by white people and people that don't look like us. And so I think it's really powerful that you can start to see the change, at least here in Pittsburgh and in Cleveland. And so we're really proud of that work that we're doing. And when we hold these lobby days, we like to give our participants training, because as Priya had mentioned, it can be rather intimidating just in general, but sometimes that's even heightened if you're a woman of color. So we give training on messaging and an overview of the legislative process and how to personalize the issues and just empowering one another to share our stories with our elected officials. And again, we think it's really important for our elected officials to hear from Black women about the issues that are important to them, because often these issues are being talked about by people that aren't experiencing these issues and problems directly. So we are really intentional with that part as well. And so I just came back on Wednesday. I was in Columbus, and we had a lobby day with a couple of our partners, and it was a really great day, and we had a successful turnout. And feeding off of that, the next slide, sorry, I'm trying to work off my PowerPoint as well. So it's also important to identify your champions. So identifying elected officials who support your mission and who care about the same issues that you do, because that can be a really meaningful and powerful relationship down the line. In this picture, you'll see some of my colleagues at our lobby day this past Wednesday in Columbus with Representative Stephanie Howes, and she's fantastic, and she's a huge supporter of New Voices, and she'll even come to our events that aren't lobby days, just like other big events, just to show support. And her presence alone is really powerful, but also she is, because she's so supportive of the work that we do, she helps facilitate our lobby days at times, and she can give us pointers of like what day out of the week is the best day to come, and if we want to meet with a particular representative, like she can possibly facilitate that or direct us to someone that can facilitate that. So it's really amazing to have and beneficial to have an insider. And also for like the other reasons, right? So like if you have a champion within the legislature, you can count on them to vote yes on bills that you support and no on ones that you oppose. And they can also have influence on their own colleagues in being able to help with the culture change and just educate their colleagues on issues that they might not be aware of. So it is really important and can be really meaningful if you can build those relationships. And so one way you can just start is by like looking up who your elected officials are and seeing what platform they ran on and how they voted on the issues that you care about. And I think that's it for that slide. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, so just shifting gears. So I also work for the Women's Law Project, and so we're a legal organization, and we've been around for over 40 years, and we're a state-based organization, and we have two offices, one here in Pittsburgh and one in Philadelphia. And throughout this whole time, we've been protecting and advancing the rights of women and girls here in Pennsylvania. And our work spans across different interrelated issues that affect the women's legal status and their health and economic security. And we do that through high-impact litigation, policy advocacy, and community education. And so the next slide, I just wanted to kind of give you a feel of what the state of women's health is here in Pennsylvania. So I think that first quote really captures it. So we're actually failing women in the state of Pennsylvania. We rank really poorly when it comes to economic security, leadership, and health. And just like some examples, just to really give it, to illustrate it. So almost 15% of women in Pennsylvania are living in poverty, and these statistics are even worse among women of color. 30.4% of black women in Pennsylvania live in poverty. We also have the 12th highest infant mortality rate. The wage gap is bigger here than it is nationally. We have the minimum wage of $7.25. So we're just doing really bad in a lot of different areas. And while this is going on, our folks in Harrisburg, our elected officials, are really just consumed with trying to pass bans on abortion instead of focusing on the issues and barriers that women and their family are facing on a daily basis. So in response to that, is the next slide, the Women's Law Project, along with other coalition members, founded the Pennsylvania Campaign for Women's Health. And so this is really a response to all the lip service that was coming from Harrisburg. And we're saying, okay, so look at all of the issues that are going on and advocating for evidence-based solutions to these problems. So it's in partnership with all these other organizations, because of our work, we are working with different communities and have opinions and also just an awareness of the issues that these people in Harrisburg are either ignoring or just unaware of. So we created a package of bills, which is the next slide, and that is under the umbrella of the Agenda for Women's Health. And so these bills are designed to address women's physical health, financial security, and personal safety. And so I think that Priya touched on this. Often you'll get these model bills from national organizations that, while that's good intention, it doesn't work out on the state level, just adopting those bills in its original form. And so our bills, we draft them, and I think that's really important because every state is different, our communities are different, the way that laws are implemented are different, and so it's really important to be really detail-oriented and really intentional with what you're trying to pass, right, and what you're trying to get a legislature to sponsor, because it can really backfire in the end. So our bills are supported by the Women's Health Caucus, which is a bipartisan group of representatives in Harrisburg, and we introduced the first wave of bills in 2013. And next slide. We have been successful in passing some of them. So some of our victories are Act 200, and that bill actually, which is now law, it prevented landlords from using local ordinances that were intended to, stop public nuisance, and it actually was used to evict survivors of domestic violence, because after so many times of the police responding to calls, that gave grounds for landlords to evict them. So we got that passed, and then we also got the revenge porn law passed, which criminalized the use without consent of pictures for retaliatory reasons. So that was successful. And then on the right, you have some of the bills that were introduced this session. So I mean, they range from increasing the minimum wage from $7.25 to $15, to the Patient Trust Act. So that would ensure that patients are giving accurate and true information by their doctors, so that states can't require doctors to provide false and inaccurate information. And reasonable accommodations for pregnant workers, breastfeeding accommodations, and a list of others. So I try to go through that fast so that we could have time for questions. So that's it, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chris. Really exciting to hear what's going on in Pennsylvania. Sorry, I have an echo. Someone can try to make sure you're muted if you're not talking. Okay, I think that's better. So that was a lot of information. Chris and Priya, I know, shared a bunch of cool stuff that's going on, both within their state and just, things to think about in your home state. So I wanted to open it up for discussion and questions. We probably have, we'll want to leave a few minutes for announcements. So we'll have, 5 minutes or so of questions here. Go ahead and just unmute yourself or type in the chat box if you want to ask a question. And me, Arnita, Chris, and Priya will all try to chime in as appropriate. So I see Sharon said, is there a women's health caucus in other states?
Yeah, I would assume so.
It depends on the state. I think this is a good research question for someone who wants to learn more about their state legislature, because some states, I would assume a lot of states have one, but some states might not.
Yeah, so I think that one, something that I might have not covered when you're trying to identify someone, some of your potential supporters in your legislatures, you could look online on their page and see if they are what caucuses they're a part of, and that can be a good indicator of trying to figure out where they might stand on your issues. But again, like Cami said, it really just does depend on state by state.
Yeah, that's a good point. That was actually a homework assignment from last week's session. So definitely, Sharon, if you want to follow up to see if the Georgia State Legislature also had a women's caucus, which I'm sure they do, that would be a great follow-up.
I see Kamaria typed a question here, too. She said, when is it considered most practical to write a resolution? Can that be done on state and federal levels? And how does one go about learning to write or draft one?
I can answer this. This is Priya. So for Washington State, resolutions are only written at the county or city level, not at the state level. And I believe that they can do a federal resolution, but it's not called that. It's like a declaration or something, and I'm not sure how often that is implemented.
Sure.
And in terms of writing one yourself,
Hello?
Hello?
I think, were you talking, Priya? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I wrote my first one 6 months ago, and what I did was there are different organizations that they do the same thing as organizations that send out templates for different states with resolutions instead. So I just looked at those. Even though they weren't what I was writing about, it just gave me an idea. And then I looked at other resolutions that had passed in the city of Seattle. And so just to get the formatting right and everything, they start whereas, and then there's a complete sentence about a fact. And so I just could get the writing style down.
Yeah. And I'll add, Kamaria, that resolutions, they might also be called proclamations, and like they were saying, I don't know if it was Chris or Priya that was saying that it's different from state to state. Some states you can only introduce them at the state level, and some you can do it at the city or county level. And you might be interested in introducing a proclamation or a declaration or a resolution, whatever they might call it, if you're trying to raise public awareness about an issue, but you're not ready for your legislator to take it, or you might be ready, but they might not be ready to take policy action on it. So it's a good political education strategy. And I don't know if you've known that some PWN chapters around our National Day to End Violence Against Women and Girls often draft declarations or resolutions in their local governments to raise awareness on that day. So it's a good first step in the policy advocacy direction. Any other questions? It sounds awfully quiet on the line. I'm not sure if everybody's still here.
No, this is not more of a question. Can y'all hear me? This is Theresa.
Yeah, we can hear you, Theresa.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up, Arnetta, about the difference. It varies from state to state what they're going to call it, whether it's a resolution, whether it's a proclamation. It varies. And like Priya said earlier, is that I just looked at some others. I got some input from you, my policy staff members of PWN, and I went ahead and I just drafted and I sent it over, and I did it on a city level for our National Violence Against Women National Day. And you just go pick it up, and it brings awareness, and if you're having like an event during that time for that the specific topic of violence against women, you can showcase it, right? At different events that you host that are part of that resolution or proclamation, just to bring awareness. So, but it is a great political education.
Yeah, I love that. And with the violence against women resolutions, oftentimes I've seen city councils create like a day in memory or in honor of some sort of resolution. So recently here, for example, we had a resolution adopting Denim Day, which is a day to honor a young victim of a horrible sexual assault in Italy, where the judge said, oh, your jeans were too tight. You couldn't have been raped because you must have helped take the jeans off. And so we passed a resolution that said, this day will now be Denim Day. People should wear denim, and also judges who don't prosecute rape should be kicked off the bench. And so having a whole day where your city government is recognizing a cause is a really good way to inform people. You can usually get one city council member to say, okay, well, I'll throw a rally if you organize it. And so, we can do little rallies outside of courthouses or whatever, making signs and giving people information about a certain topic.
Excellent.
Hello, this is Sharon. I had noticed my Republican representative, he has a lot of recognition days when I had started to look at the type of legislation that he has passed. Like most of them are recognition days. And I was hoping to create a resolution or proclamation, proclamation for a recognition day of educating about HIV with care, not fear, because I noticed in the language of the Georgia law around criminalization, the word infected is used a lot in front of the person, and for it feels like years now we've been telling organizations, individuals, everyone to use people first language, but it's still not catching up to a lot of the documentation and especially the laws. So I was just wondering if you think that's a good idea and if it's something that we can work on.
Yeah, I think it's a fabulous idea. I think that's exactly what resolutions and honorarium days should be used for, to get people's attention and educate them about something, and that's really important. So yeah, go for it. Sit in some city council meetings, start to get to know the landscape and the people and make sure your face is known.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I only have a couple more minutes. Does anyone else have questions? I saw Tiami was asking about some of the work that Chris is doing in Pennsylvania. I think Tiami was asking where the women's law or where the New Voices work is happening in Philadelphia. So let me see if I can find it in the chat. And if you're on, go ahead.
Yeah, so we just opened an office in West Philly. I'm not quite sure the address, but yeah, we have one of our organizers is there, and she's fantastic. If you're interested in getting connected with her, I can give you her information. But yeah, we started here in Pittsburgh, and we've expanded quite a lot in a short amount of time. So we're really excited about that. Some of the work that my colleague in Philly is working on right now, she's doing work with, I believe it's the Cherry Hills Women Health Center, and they're working on, responding to the crisis pregnancy centers. So in Pennsylvania, they've are given. So just like the quick background of I'm sure of crisis pregnancy centers. They not all of them, but at least in Pennsylvania, they are a place that women who are pregnant can go to, and often at times they are anti-abortion, and often at times they give women inaccurate and false information as a way to coerce their decision making. And we do not think that they should be receiving public funding if that is the case, if they're not giving women accurate information. And so my colleague is working on that issue, in addition to just building our organization in Philadelphia, because we are new there, so making connections and seeing how New Voices can collaborate with other organizations there.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Okay, I do want to, I hear myself echoing. We only have a couple more minutes, so if you all could stay on the line and let Arnita, our fearless leader, go over some of the next announcements. But sorry, was there something that you wanted to add, Priya? Oh, I think she had to jump off.
She had to get off.
Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you again to Christine and Priya for being really fantastic presenters and sharing all that you're working on with us. It's really exciting.
Thank you for having us.
And I'm sure
I think everybody.
I'm sure Chris and Priya are happy to field questions that you might have, or can share some of that information about what's happening in their states. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for all of your questions.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you guys both so much. I think everybody can agree. We got a lot of feedback that this was really awesome, very helpful in connecting some of the dots from last week, and we're just really building here. So thank you both. And yeah, it'd be great if you could pass along your contact information, if folks could continue to use you as a resource after today. So thank you.
Yeah,
I have a few quick announcements. Oh, yeah, thank you. I have a few quick announcements before we hop off. I know we started a couple minutes late, so just take a couple minutes. I don't know. Tammy, could you advance the slides? I'm not able to. I don't know. Slow moving. Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, I had a few announcements for everybody. I think that everybody should have received an email from me earlier this week with the policy workgroup sign up. So I think we mentioned on the program orientation call, I think Cammie explained that we'd like for everybody to have an opportunity to present on the PWN Policy Work Group Call. This is a monthly work group call that Cami facilitates, where this is just designed, this opportunity is designed to give everybody kind of a, a low pressure opportunity to share about what you've been learning over the course of the fellowship, or maybe in working with your policy team, with the broader community of PWNers and women living with HIV who join those calls. So you should have received a Google Sheet sign up with a link to sign up. So everybody should sign up at least once. To have, we can, you can sign up more than once, but, allow space for people to actually sign up if you sign up more than once. But yeah, we're asking that everybody sign up at least once over the course of your fellowship. So if you haven't done that, feel free to do that now. I think the first time for sign up is May 24th, and I think, Cami, maybe some folks have already signed up already, but I'm not sure. Okay, second, we're going to be posting a post-session assignment on the assignment sheet that went around. I think everybody did pretty well with that, and turning your assignments in on time. I just asked, of course, this is like, we've already been calling it our little online classroom. We have to treat it like a classroom in some respect. If you know that you might not be able to turn it in on time, please just send me an email like you would to anybody else, to let them know that, to let me know that you aren't going to be able to get it in on time, so we can accommodate you in that way. Member survey. We are, I don't know if you've seen our emails. I don't know, Cami, did this go out to the list? Our internal list for the fellows? Or whatever the case is.
I know we've been sending it out over our other membership list, but I don't know if we've sent it specifically to just the fellows. We've been putting it out on social media and also because we want it to have a really far reach.
For sure. We have, we're in the process of doing a massive membership survey for all women living with HIV, inclusive of women of trans experience, to know more about how we can tailor our advocacy and any of the programs or anything that we do, and making sure that it's community informed and driven. So we're asking, if you haven't done so, please, take some time to fill out the survey. I think it takes 20 to 30 minutes to fill out and to complete. And if you do complete it, and not just fill out a few questions, but complete the whole thing, you'll be entered into a raffle to win an Amazon gift card for $100. So there's nothing wrong with that. On Monday, we are going to be having our second policy agenda listening session. I know some of you had the opportunity to join the first session that Cami led, which was really awesome. I think I'll let you know that we're in the process of updating PWN's policy agenda and our policy priorities in light of the current political climate, and just basically what are the emerging needs for women living with HIV right now. We want to make sure that process is also community informed. And so we're having a listening session to kind of get your ideas and feedback around where we should be devoting our advocacy energy in the coming years. And that's going to be on Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern, I believe, and we can recirculate the call information, but I think there's a Google form that you would use to RSVP, and we can send that to you too. And with the process of forming our new policy agenda, we're actually forming a policy agenda committee, or we're calling it a policy agenda squad, because that's more fun than a committee or a working group of folks that can help us actually draft the new policy priorities and have input on that. So if you're actually interested in joining the policy agenda squad, please do let me know. You can send me an email directly, or Cami an email. Either one of us would be great, and we can loop you in on when we'll be meeting. We'll be having our first meeting sometime next week, I believe on May 11th. And then finally, our session evaluations. Everybody did do pretty well with getting their session evaluations in. I understand that some folks did not see the link that came from any meeting directly post-webinar. So what we'll do is actually provide you with a separate link after the session today that we'll post with your assignment, so that you can fill that out. And I hope you do take time to fill those session evaluations out meaningfully. I looked at the feedback that you provided from last week, and we really tried to make some changes to make this process as meaningful and fruitful for you all as possible. So it can only make things better. So teamwork makes the dream work on that, and I appreciate you all I know it's Friday. I know we're 6 minutes after 4:30, so I won't keep you any longer. But yeah, thank you all. I know it's been a crazy week, but we're here. We'll protect each other. We'll keep resisting. And I'm glad to have you all in this training to lead the fight. So thank you all. Thank you, everybody. I guess I should ask if there were any questions. Okay, great. Be expecting some emails from us as always.
Yeah, and I do see that someone asked where they can watch the past. Angela asked where the past recordings are going to be. I know we're going to have them up online. I'm not sure if they're yet.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm sorry, this is kind of lagging a little bit, but we are trying to set up a password-protected portion of our website that's just for you guys, since you guys exchange in some dialogue and some back and forth with either the facilitators or hopefully with each other throughout the course of the fellowship. But we want to make sure that information was private, so we want to post that on a portion of the website that only you guys could access. And Jenny, our communications director, is still working on setting that up. But as I've done with the other sessions, I can send out the link to the recording and you got via email after the session today when it's available, so you guys can feel free to go back and listen to that. We already sent out the slides from today, so you can review them together too. And Brandy, there will be an assignment, and we'll post that. We'll post that after today's session too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Brandy also asked if there's an evaluation for each session, and there will be, just because this is our first. This is our pilot program, and you're our inaugural fellow group, so we want to get as much information as we can throughout the process and, do our best to figure out what sessions were helpful, what ones could be improved, and, other things that we need to build in to make it as effective and that you all can be getting as much out of it as possible.
Awesome.
All right.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Happy Friday.
Yes, thanks, everyone. Take care.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you, Chris and Priya, again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes.